Okay, I'm done. You can't. I'm officially placing Trump in the unique position that I've only placed one other global leader on, the Vladimir Putin insanity position. Okay, that's it. Officially, I'm done looking for reason behind his actions. Now we're going to talk about
We're going to begin with
President Trump addressing Congress as new tariffs take effect on Mexico, Canada, and China.
Also, the hefty new tariffs on imported goods from Canada, Mexico, and China. And this morning, by the way, China has said it will retaliate, and Canada also already hitting back. And that is just one of many moves this White House has made to expand the power of the executive branch. So much has happened, really, that even folks here in Washington, D.C. struggle at times to process it all. But that's why we have Nancy Cordes, our chief White House correspondent, to stay on top of everything. Nancy, good morning.
Good morning, Tony. I have had my struggles, but today is a day that the president will be front and center. And you know that this is a president who cares a lot about the stock market, but yet...
Yeah, no, he cares so much. That's why he's destroying it. That's my king. That's J.D. Pondam, baby. That's my goat right there. He said, the Treatlerites must suffer. Permanent first. He said, hold on, let me put this on. J.D. Pondam said, permanent first world genocide. The Treatlerites in the suburbs will scream bloody murder. I will take away their treats. Have fun. Enjoy the treats while you can. You will never enjoy them again. The Chinese century of prosperity is upon us. I will make our allies scream, and in the process, I will cripple the America economy. It's Trumponomics.
Yesterday, after he announced that there was no way...
Last night, I realized I was a Treatlerite when I took out a Trader Joe's lasagna and it said product of Canada, and I realized it would go up 25% time next time I buy it. That's right. Trader Joe's lasagna from Canada, which is a settler colonial entity in and of itself under the banner of the Commonwealth, still holding up loyalty to the British Empire. Canada will also suffer.
Out for Canada and Mexico, the Dow fell 650 points. Still, 25% tariffs on their goods went into effect overnight with President...
He said, the labor aristocracy. I love doing JD Pondon. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop. I'm going to dial it back a little bit.
Trump calling it a punishment, though it's unclear in the case of Canada in particular what that punishment exactly is for.
No room left for Mexico or for Canada.
President Trump is calling today's tariffs a powerful weapon, a weapon that will now be wielded on food, lumber, electronics, cars, anything that comes into the U.S.
so I can
from
say
Canada and Mexico.
It's a very powerful weapon that politicians haven't used because they were either dishonest, stupid, or paid off in some other form. And now we're using them.
The move could wound American consumers, too, as producers pass along that new 25% tax, driving up the cost of a small car.
I still genuinely do not understand what, Trump's internal purpose for this is. I don't know. I've said this already. I've tried to make sense of this. I've talked about how maybe it's because he wants to, bully key sectors into submission. But having said that, this is across the board tariffs. So it's not even divided evenly by sector. It just does not make sense. It truly feels like he is trying to, it truly feels like he is just trying to break everything. This, US aid, I understand a little bit more, right? He's not doing it because he's not undermining and crippling US aid because he is trying to eradicate American soft power at the global stage. He's doing it because he personally thinks US aid is just libtard, right? He thinks US aid and all the NGOs and civil society organizations that it funds is a money sink for numerous Democratic Party goals and organizations. There's some truth to that. However, it plays a broader role in doing the bidding of American empire at the end of the day. Trump might not have the foresight to recognize that, right? He might not have the foresight to recognize that. He might be more interested in changing the approach that America has had in terms of focusing on soft power initiatives and hyper-focusing exclusively and entirely on permanent war. Not to be a hater, but why do you think Trump unilaterally decides any of this? I mean, I think when I say Trump, I'm not just talking about Trump. I'm talking about like his advisors as well. I'm not simply referencing Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump operates on his own, obviously. I guess the other point for the tariffs is that it's a regressive tax, and he will use the additional money that they get from tariffs as a way to say, we filled up the government coffers, now it's time to cut the only progressive tax that exists, which is income tax. And even then, there's a million different loopholes. I mean, we've talked about all of this stuff already, but it still does not make a whole lot of sense.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's ClemSaur here, and today we've got a deep dive into some really interesting topics. We're going to be breaking down some political and economic discussions from the perspective of the far right, and I'm going to be reacting to a transcript that really brings out some strong points about the state of things in America, its economy, and even trade relations. It's been a wild time in politics, and I think it's important to look at things critically, so I hope you're ready for a thought-provoking discussion. So, grab a seat, hit that like button if you enjoy the content, and let's get started. Alright, let's break this down. This entire conversation is framed by the globalist agenda, an agenda that seeks to undermine everything we stand for as Americans. From trade deals that prioritize the interests of foreign countries over the American worker, to policies that allow China and Mexico to take advantage of us, it's clear we're living under a system rigged against the people. The elites, the establishment, they think they know better, but it's time for us to fight back. We're not going to let them ruin the future of this country with their liberal policies that have sold out American workers for decades. This conversation, these tariffs, and the so-called trade war they're talking about? It's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about putting America first, about restoring the sovereignty and power that this country once held. And let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. When it comes down to it, it's about our future, our economy, and making sure we get a fair deal in the world, not being taken advantage of by countries who are not playing by the same rules. You know, they always love to use the stock market as a barometer of success. And when it reacts to tariffs, these elites get nervous, start saying, oh no, it's the end of the world. But they've got it all wrong. They want us to believe that tariffs are hurting us, but what's really happening is that they're threatening the globalist system that's been in place for so long. The stock market reacts because the people behind it know that a shift is happening. They're afraid that America is starting to say, enough is enough. We've been hearing about the so-called free market for years, and what has it done? It's allowed China to manipulate the system, to steal American jobs and manufacturing. It's allowed Mexico to take advantage of us, making American workers pay the price. The truth is, the market is scared because it knows things are about to change, and the ones who benefit from this broken system are about to lose their grip. It's the elites versus the American people, and they've been winning for too long. Now, let's talk about tariffs. For decades, we've been told that they're a bad idea. But who's been pushing that narrative? It's the same globalists who've been profiting off the destruction of American industries. Tariffs hurt the price of consumer goods, they say, but let's be honest, we've been sold a lie. What we've been doing is importing cheap goods from countries that don't play by the same rules. Countries like China, Mexico, and others who don't have to follow the same labor standards, environmental rules, or worker protections. Tariffs are a necessary tool to restore balance. The global elites don't like them because it cuts into their profits, but it's the right move for the American people. The goal here isn't just to make stuff cheaper, it's to bring jobs back to the United States, to restore our manufacturing base, and to stop outsourcing our future to foreign countries. We've been sending jobs overseas for too long, and it's time to reverse that trend. Now, let's look at the situation with Canada. They're supposed to be our friends, right? Well, not when it comes to trade. They take advantage of us just like any other country. When you look at these trade deals, it's clear that Canada has been benefiting more from the relationship than we have. They're benefiting from our cheap imports, they're benefiting from our lumber, from our resources, and we're left footing the bill. Here's the truth. We don't need to be afraid of a trade war with Canada. Canada can fend for itself. They've been treating us like a doormat for too long, and now we need to look at the long-term picture. We don't need to keep giving them a free pass. If they don't want to play by our rules, then they can pay the price. We've been too kind, and it's time to stop pretending that every country we've been trading with is somehow entitled to our goodwill. Let's take a minute to talk about Europe. They've been pushing their fuel standards and environmental regulations on us for years. Now they want us to change our entire vehicle industry to fit their model. Why? What makes Europe so special? They can barely keep their economies afloat with their failed immigration policies and their crumbling welfare states. And yet, they think they can dictate to us how we should build our cars, what kinds of vehicles we should be driving. It's absurd. We're Americans. We don't need to be beholden to European standards. Our trucks are a part of our identity. They symbolize our independence, our strength, and our commitment to the American way of life. Why should we change that just to satisfy European bureaucrats? The world doesn't get to tell us how to live. If Europe wants to deal with their own economic and environmental problems, that's their business. But we're going to do things our way, whether they like it or not. So, when we talk about car manufacturing in America, there's a bigger issue at play. It's not just about the tariffs, it's about the fact that American car manufacturers have sold out. Ford, GM, all of them, they've been shifting production to Mexico, China, and other countries for years. They claim it's cheaper, but all they're doing is leaving American workers in the dust. And then, when they do bring products back to the US, they're often low quality because they're trying to cut corners to save money. We shouldn't be playing these games anymore. We need to bring manufacturing back to America, and if that means putting tariffs on foreign-made cars, then so be it. American workers deserve jobs that pay well, jobs that help families thrive. These jobs used to exist in Detroit and other industrial hubs, but they've been shipped overseas, leaving behind rusted-out factories and abandoned communities. It's time to bring that back. We don't need European or Asian-made cars flooding our market. We need to be making them here. Now, let's talk about China. The situation with China is growing worse every day. They've been flooding the American market with cheap goods for years, using slave labor and unfair trade practices. And now, they're pushing their electric car industry, trying to undercut American businesses. They're flooding the market with electric vehicles because their government is propping them up with subsidies, and we're supposed to accept that as some kind of fair competition? No. We can't let this happen. The electric car industry is one of the few growing industries left in the US, and if China keeps pushing these policies, they're going to steal that from us, too. But here's the thing. They're not doing it for the benefit of the world. They're doing it to control the future of the auto industry, and we can't let that happen. If we want to protect American innovation, we have to fight back against China, and that means standing firm on tariffs and trade restrictions. Let's take a moment to appreciate what Trump has done with these tariffs. I know people have been critical, saying they hurt consumers in the short term, but what they fail to see is the bigger picture. These tariffs are a tool to reset the global balance of power. The globalist elites hate these tariffs because they take away their leverage. They no longer control the world's trade. America is taking its place at the head of the table again, and the establishment doesn't like it. Well, tough. Trump is shaking up the system in a way that no one else has been willing to do. And you know why the elites are worried? Because they're losing their grip. These tariffs are just the beginning. They're forcing America to rethink its relationships with foreign countries. We've been giving away too much, for too long, and it's time for that to stop. Trump is doing the right thing, and he's doing it for the people. The establishment will fight him at every turn, but it's up to us to stand with him. Now, inflation is something that's on everyone's mind. The media loves to blame tariffs for higher prices, but the reality is that inflation has been a problem for decades because of globalist policies. We've been told that importing cheap goods would lower costs for consumers, but what we've actually done is destabilize our economy and sell out American jobs. The globalist policies were designed to weaken our economy. We let China flood our markets with cheap goods, while American industries stagnated. These industries were killed off to save a few dollars in the short term, but now we're facing the consequences. Tariffs are a necessary correction to this. We can't keep living in a fantasy world where importing cheap goods means prosperity. It's time to reinvest in American industry and put American workers first.
An estimated $6,200, or an SUV by $9,000. So many car components are built across the border.
Because of the arbitrary nature of the emergency use of tariffs that are being done, we don't know how long they're going to be in effect. At the end of the day, there is little doubt that consumers will feel the pain of this, but it will also impact consumer demand as well.
Economic uncertainty already pushed consumer confidence down in February.
This will help Tesla, right? No, it won't. No, it will help zero car manufacturers, because even the cars that are manufactured in the United States of America, because of previous trade agreements, whether it be NAFTA or, ironically enough, the trade agreement that Donald Trump did, NAFTA 2, right, has created this network of back and forth between Canada and Mexico, where they pass the border, pass the American border into Mexico, pass the border into Canada, and vice versa, a million times until the car is assembled in the United States of America. That actually ends up, yes, USMCA is what I'm talking about. That actually ends up greatly increasing the cost of the car if they have to pay for all of the different parts that are being manufactured in Mexico or Canada before it makes its way into the United States of America, when every single car manufacturer is paying an entry fee numerous times over. Yes, United States, Mexico, Canada agreement, which was signed on July 1st, 2020, okay, drafted in the 30th of September 2018, is an agreement that Donald Trump put forth, which was a substitution for NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, which Donald Trump was very much against. But then he basically did the exact same thing. For the people who still don't understand how tariffs work, it is an entry fee that Americans pay for, okay? American importers pay for, just so you understand. It's not paid by the Mexican government, and it's not paid by the Canadian government. The negative consequences for trade for the Canadian or the Mexican side will obviously be that people will look for domestic manufacturers instead, or they will go to other foreign nations that provide the same exact resources, same exact materials, or same exact parts at a cheaper price, because now they don't have a additional 25% that they have to pay at the point of bringing it into the United States of America. So it will lower trade, and it will restrict. I mean, it has the capacity to restrict trade. That is why it's often used. I am not anti-tariff across the board. I've said this many times over. I'm not, I'm not against trade protectionist. I'm not against trade protectionism across the board. I do think that there needs to be, obviously, a competitive manufacturing industry. And the irony here is that for many of the things that, if you're doing, across the board tariffs, there is no competitive domestic manufacturing on some of the raw materials, for example, that you need. Like, what are you going to do if it just doesn't exist here?
A new CBS News poll, just 24% of Americans say the economy is getting better.
This is bad, because normally it's the 30% that are like the Trump loyalists that will always say, no, it's getting better. It's so sick now. I love the economy. And even that number has like diminished. He's sub 30 in his super base. Okay. That's not good.
49% said it's getting worse. But President Trump says that tariffs are needed to punish Mexico and Canada for allowing migrants and the deadly drug fentanyl into the U.S.
Less than 1% of all fentanyl that comes into the U.S. is apprehended at the Canadian border. So why use fentanyl as a reason?
They're only apprehending 1%. You're right about that. It's a little more than that. But they should be apprehending much more, because a lot comes through Canada.
Again, all the data that we have indicates that that is simply not the case. But what does come in through Canada is about a third of the softwood lumber that this nation uses, which has led analysts to predict that home building prices will be going up. President Trump says that if companies don't like these new tariffs, they can simply move production to the United States. But Tony, when it comes to things like
what are you going to do? What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, okay, you don't like the tariffs? It's time to destroy our our forests? Is that what it is? Oh, you don't like the tariffs? Okay, well, sorry. Time to destroy American forests. Canada just has a lot of trees, man. They have a lot of allocation for this. What are you supposed to do? I mean, we got forests too. Don't misunderstand me. We got forests out here. It's just that, like, I guess he just wants to destroy the remainder of the American forests. They announced that yesterday, going to clear 280 million acres of national forest trees. Jesus Christ, dude. I mean, I suspect that it'll be much easier to do these sorts of things when you can't do an impact study because you fired every researcher and you think impact studies are woke and gay. I wonder what the long-term consequences will look like when you're just gutting the remainder of the American forests now. Oh, great. I love having people control the wheel that have no interest in being even remotely reasonable.
And let's talk about the US dollar for a moment. The media will tell you that the dollar is too strong, that it's hurting American exports. But let's be clear about one thing. The dollar is a weapon. It's one of the few things keeping us in a position of global power. The globalists want to weaken the dollar, and they'll use any excuse to do it. We've used the dollar to dictate the terms of global trade, and it's served us well. The elites, however, want to get rid of that advantage. They don't want the US to be in control of the financial system, and they're willing to sacrifice the dollar to do that. We can't let that happen. The strength of the dollar is what gives us leverage on the world stage. If we let it fall, we risk losing our status as the world's economic leader. Reindustrialization is the next step. We can't just slap tariffs on China and expect everything to magically fix itself. It's going to take time to rebuild the American manufacturing base, to reinvest in our workers, and to create the industries of the future. But we've got to start somewhere, and tariffs are just the beginning. The American people are tired of seeing their jobs outsourced. They're tired of being told that they need to learn to code or become part of the gig economy while their factories shut down. We need to bring manufacturing back home, invest in our people, and ensure that the next generation has a strong, thriving economy to look forward to. The political landscape in America is a battlefield. On one side, you've got the globalists, the elites, the establishment who have sold out our future for the sake of power and profit. On the other side, you've got regular Americans who want a better life for themselves and their children. Trump is on the side of the people, but the globalists will fight him at every turn. They want to keep things the way they've been because it benefits them, not us. But the people are waking up. We can't afford to go back to the old ways of doing business. We need to keep fighting for the future of this country, and that means standing firm against globalism and putting America first. In conclusion, we're at a crossroads. We have a choice. We can continue down the path of globalism, allowing other countries to take advantage of us while our industries collapse, or we can take control of our future. The tariffs, the trade wars, they're all part of a larger plan to put America back on top, to reassert our dominance in the world. It's going to be a tough fight. The elites will resist. But we have the power to take back our country. We need to keep fighting for American workers, for American sovereignty, and for the future of this nation. The globalists may have had their time, but their time is coming to an end. It's time for America to rise again. All right, we're diving right back in. Over the past few decades, globalism has taken a hold on the United States. And let's be clear, this isn't some abstract concept. This has real-world consequences on American families, on jobs, and on the very fabric of our society. Globalism has given rise to massive trade deficits, the hollowing out of entire industries, and the devastation of American communities. And who benefits? The elites, the multinational corporations, and the politicians who get rich off these deals. Now, you've heard all the rhetoric. Globalization is the future, they say. They say we should embrace open borders, free trade, and the idea that national sovereignty doesn't matter. But the truth is, this globalist agenda has been nothing more than a one-way street that has left America behind. It's time we start looking at this issue from a perspective that actually puts American workers and American values first. One of the key components of globalism has been the outsourcing of manufacturing. Just take a look at the Rust Belt, the once thriving factories of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and other industrial hubs that have been left to rot. These were jobs that supported families, gave people a sense of pride, and drove economic growth. And what happened? Corporations and politicians, eager to cut costs and boost profits, shipped those jobs overseas to countries where labor was cheap and environmental standards were lax. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate choice made by the elites to pad their pockets while leaving millions of Americans without work. What did these so-called free market policies really get us? A decimated middle class, a generation of workers without opportunities, and an economy that relies on cheap imports rather than strong domestic production. And guess who paid the price? The American worker. Let's talk about free trade for a moment. The globalists love to sell us on the idea of free trade. They tell us that if we remove tariffs and open up our borders, everything will magically be cheaper, and the economy will thrive. But what they don't tell you is that free trade, as it's currently structured, isn't fair at all. Free trade only works if all parties are playing by the same rules. But when one country is cheating, whether through unfair subsidies, currency manipulation, or exploitation of workers, then it's not really free trade, is it? Look at China. They've been manipulating their currency for years to make their exports artificially cheaper. They've used slave labor, ignored environmental standards, and created unfair trade barriers. And yet, we're supposed to pretend that this is some level playing field? The globalists have tried to sell us this lie, but it's time to wake up. Free trade isn't free if it's rigged against us. And that's why tariffs are necessary. For years, we've been told that importing goods from countries like China, Mexico, and others is the key to economic prosperity. But what happens when we rely too heavily on foreign imports? We lose control of our economy. We're no longer producing the goods we need right here at home. And if something goes wrong on the global stage, whether it's a trade war, a natural disaster, or a supply chain breakdown, we're left vulnerable. This is not just about economics. It's about national security. When you can't even make your own medicine, your own electronics, or your own food, you're at the mercy of other countries. And when those countries are not our allies, this is a problem. The American economy should be built on self-reliance, not dependence on foreign powers who don't have our best interests at heart. Economic nationalism is about putting America first. It's about taking back control of our economy, regaining our manufacturing base, and ensuring that American workers are the ones benefiting from the jobs we create. For too long, we've allowed multinational corporations and foreign governments to dictate the terms of trade. They've been using cheap labor and lax regulations to flood our markets, and we've stood by and watched our industries crumble. Now, the time for change is here. We need to make it clear that America's interests come first. It's not about being anti-trade, it's about fair trade. It's about protecting American workers and American businesses from unfair competition. It's about rebuilding our economy, restoring jobs, and ensuring that the American people benefit from the prosperity they help create. When you hear politicians and corporate elites talking about open borders and mass immigration, you need to understand the agenda behind it. They don't care about the social or economic consequences of uncontrolled immigration. They care about cheap labor. They want to flood the country with low-wage workers who will drive down wages for everyone else, especially American workers. This isn't about compassion. It's about profit. The elites want to keep wages low and maximize their profits at the expense of the American worker. It's all part of the globalist agenda to create a world where they control the economy and the people, while the rest of us are left to struggle. We need to put an end to this. We need to secure our borders, protect American workers, and stop the influx of cheap labor that is eroding our middle class. Now, let's go back to tariffs for a moment. I know there are some who argue that tariffs hurt consumers by raising prices, but the reality is that tariffs are a necessary tool to protect American industries from being undermined by foreign competitors.
Doing absolute death and destruction. Great stuff. You can't ramp up production that quickly. There's also that side of it too, but I'm not even going to get into that. There's also obviously the fact that you can't just like materialize out of nowhere all of these businesses that seemingly did not exist. You know, you just can't do that.
Hey, good morning, Robin. Well, the short answer here is that a lot of products that we buy day to day could get more expensive. Groceries, gas, shoes, clothes, electronics. Mexico, Canada, and China, they accounted for almost half of all of the goods that were shipped into the U.S. last year. Okay, so if these tariffs stay in place, economists expect you could start to see price hikes by Memorial Day. For groceries, it could be within weeks or even days, Robin. So take fresh produce, for example. About 63% of U.S. vegetable imports come from Mexico. Think bell peppers, cucumbers, strawberries, tomatoes, limes, avocados, a lot of that fresh produce. And grocers, they can't really stockpile those foods in advance. So if they decide to pass down the entire 25% tariff, that means your $3 avocado could end up costing $3.75 pretty quickly. Liquor, like tequila and Canadian whiskey, could also get more expensive. And then the auto sector, really another big one at risk here. Automakers rely on thousands of different car parts that are traded between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. If they are paying more to get those parts, you could end up paying $3,000 more for a new car. And some of the dealers that we've talked to say that they might raise those prices within months, Robin.
And many are wondering about gas prices, Elizabeth. Could they go up too?
They could. So about 60% of the crude oil that the U.S. imports comes from Canada. Our refineries are actually uniquely built to process Canadian oil. The national average right now for a gallon of gas about $3. Gas Buddy expects that the tariffs mean prices could go up by 15 cents a gallon in the Midwest.
That's right. My goat, he's doing it. He's doing it. He's fixing the cost of living crisis by making it so that, by making it so expensive that you just die. It's so sick. He's doing it, man. This goes back to the thing that I was talking about initially, the resentment and the jealousy that I have, the envy that I have for Trump getting to do whatever he wants and his fan base just eating it up like it's the most brilliant thing that's ever happened. He's doing it again. He could just be like, yep, that's right. You're going to suffer, but it's okay because you deserve to suffer. We are going to deindustrialize the United States of America. The labor aristocracy will suffer the largest penalties for the American empire's cruelty. Endless bounty, unequal exchange is over, folks. Okay, I love that for months I said, and many other people who understand what's going on said over and over again that this is going to tank the American economy, that this is going to make everything insanely expensive. We said this over and over again, and for some weird reason, no one on the conservative side ever took this seriously. Like, I don't get it. Let's listen to Maria Bartiromo crashing out at a auto dealership guy freaking out about these tariffs.
Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram.
Yeah.
Impact.
Dramatic. I sold order for a customer. $80,000 truck. It's $100,000 now. So he's not going to buy the truck. It's going to sit on my lot at the higher interest rates we're paying right now for floor plan, and nobody's going to buy the truck because it just had a $20,000 price increase.
Right. Kelley Blue Book will put the number up. They say the average vehicle will go up by about $3,000. Does it sound right to you?
No, it will not. We don't have the broad stroke. We don't have the linear, the tight strokes.
I just wanted to make my camera smaller so you can see the Dow futures on the ticker in the corner there. Like, while all of this is happening, the stock market is taking a nosedive, which is also weird. He said he was going to do it. This is the other thing that I don't understand. Why is the stock market responding to this now? He's been saying he's going to do this for months at this point. I just do not understand. Stocks mostly rebound. I know, but like, I don't know. I don't understand it. I'm too stupid, I guess. I'm too stupid to understand the high IQ games that people are playing on the stock market.
But think about it. We built our business around that. The OEMs built their business around that. And now it changes on a dime. And we can't build a $4 billion plant overnight in the United States. So I think building in the United States is great. I think enhancing the participation from the other countries on the other things. But this is pretty radical.
I hear you. There you go, Maria, where the rubber meets the road here.
All right, great. Yeah.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, exactly. Jeff, thank you. Thank you so much. Jeff Flock at the Dodge Ram plant. Not plant. It's not a plant, Chris. They're selling cars. Thank you, dealership. But you know what? Let me ask you this, okay?
Yes.
How many Dodge Rams do you see driving around Europe? Okay.
I once again am asking Amerifat morons why they do not make cars that are appropriate for the European market and then sit there and demand that they drive these behemoth tanks on roads that cannot sustain them. Make better cars. It's so stupid. Make smaller, fuel-efficient cars with smaller engines. That's it. Abide by EU standards and regulations. The Chinese car manufacturers never turned around and were like, no, you're going to drive our version of these vehicles. We don't care. They looked at the market and they were like, okay, we'll make these incredibly competitive and very cheap electric vehicles, and we will flood your market, and they will be impossible to compete with on a price point because we're heavily subsidizing it. That's it. It's not like they were sitting around being like, no, we want to make tanks. Why won't the dumb Europeans purchase our tanks? The cars that we make here in the United States of America are ginormous. It's so frustrating. Where they're like, why won't they buy our tanks? Why won't they do that? They made the calculation that the American cultural exports will eventually lead Europeans to want street tanks, and to some extent it's working. I see way too many Ram 1500s on the road here in Austria. Wait, really? I thought you meant Australia. I was about to say, well, they have a Ute culture over there, but Austria? That's crazy. I hate that the one good thing about the European Union is walkable cities and a walkable infrastructure and public transit. And that is partially because, you know, they did that before the American brain rot set in. Okay, they did that. And now we're just like going to force their hands and be like, nah, dude. You have to have these tanks. You have to literally rebuild your cities, destroy the public transit so that you can have Ford F-150 pickup trucks driving around. You have to literally destroy what remains of like the parks and whatnot so you can create these ginormous parking lot structures.
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense. Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. At the moment, the U.S. tariffs came into effect in the early hours of this morning, and so did the Canadian response.
Boom.
Canada will be implementing.
Yeah, enjoy not having maple syrup, you American dummies. I'm kidding. Obviously, there's so much more than just maple syrup. Let's be real, but
25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods. Starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time. Just like I did a month ago, I want to speak first directly to the American people. We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. Now, the legal pretext your government is using to bring in these tariffs is that Canada is apparently unwilling to help in the fight against illegal fentanyl. Well, that is totally false. Let's look at the facts. Our border is already safe and secure. Far less than 1% of fentanyl flows and less than 1% of illegal crossings into the United States.
I think one of the funniest aspects of this is like Trudeau is like subtly trying to throw Mexico under the bus here and also fact-checking Trump. But what's hilarious about it is that Claudia Sheinbaum did her version of this as well, which is that Claudia Sheinbaum said the objective reality, which is that fentanyl is trafficked into the United States by American nationals for the American public consumer. Okay? That's it. It's the truth. American citizens are the ones who are trafficking the fentanyl into the United States of America for the consumption of other American citizens. And in the process, those American citizens also defend the cartel's interests by giving them endless amounts of weapons. We are a belligerent state that is ruining the lives of, actively ruining the lives of countries that unfortunately are near our national boundaries. But God forbid we take ownership over any of that. No.
They're a way to level the playing field. The globalist elites may complain about higher prices on consumer goods, but they're ignoring the bigger picture. We're talking about protecting American manufacturing, securing American jobs, and rebuilding an economy that works for the people. Tariffs are a way to ensure that American businesses can compete fairly. If other countries aren't playing by the same rules, if they're subsidizing their industries or engaging in unfair practices, then we have every right to impose tariffs to protect ourselves. The free market isn't really free if it's rigged against us. Tariffs give us the leverage we need to get fair deals and ensure that our economy is strong and self-sufficient. Let's be clear, a trade war with China is a necessary step to protect American interests. For too long, China has been taking advantage of us, stealing our intellectual property, manipulating their currency, and flooding our markets with cheap, subpar products. This is a fight for the future of America. China is not our friend. They're a rising power that seeks to challenge American dominance on the world stage. We can't afford to let them continue their economic assault. Tariffs are one of the few tools we have to stand up to China and protect American industries. Sure, there will be some pain in the short term, but the long-term benefits far outweigh the costs. We can't allow China to dominate the global economy while American businesses are left struggling to compete. Let's take a moment to talk about the left's economic policies. Their obsession with identity politics and open borders is not just wrong, it's dangerous for the American working class. The left wants to push policies that benefit global elites and foreign interests at the expense of American families. They want to sell out our workers, our industries, and our culture to advance their radical left-wing agenda. Take a look at their stance on trade, open borders, unchecked immigration, and trade deals that benefit everyone except the American worker. They claim to be fighting for the little guy, but the truth is they've sold out the very people they claim to protect. Tariffs, strong borders, and economic nationalism are the tools we need to fight back against these destructive policies. It's time to rebuild the American dream. For too long, we've been told that the American dream is out of reach for working-class families. We've been told that the only way to succeed is to adapt to the global economy and accept the destruction of our manufacturing base. But that's a lie. The American dream isn't about accepting defeat. It's about taking control of our future and rebuilding our economy from the ground up. We can bring manufacturing back to America. We can restore good-paying jobs. And we can create an economy that works for everyone, not just the elites. But to do that, we need to reject globalism and embrace economic nationalism. We need to put America first, and we need leaders who are willing to stand up to the globalist forces that are trying to destroy our country. Looking ahead, the future of America depends on bold leadership. We can't afford to keep kicking the can down the road. We need leaders who are willing to make tough decisions, who are willing to stand up to the global elites, and who are committed to putting the American people first. This is not a time for weak compromises or politically correct solutions. This is a time for action. We've got to be bold. We've got to fight for our workers, for our industries, and for our families. The globalists have been in control for too long, and it's time to take back our country. It's time for America to rise again, and we need leaders who will stand up and fight for what's right. So let's sum this up. We need to fight for our future. We need to take control of our economy, secure our borders, bring back manufacturing, and ensure that American workers are the ones benefiting from the prosperity they create. The globalists have had their time, and it's time for America to take back what's rightfully ours. We cannot afford to wait any longer. We need bold, decisive action, and we need to make sure that the next generation inherits a strong, prosperous, and independent America. The time for change is now. All right, folks, let's dive right back in here. Now, we were just talking about the way the stock market's reacting to these tariffs, and I've got to say, this is something that should be alarming to anyone paying attention. The stock market's taking a hit, and we've got people scratching their heads wondering why it's happening now when this has been in the works for months. You know, what I'm hearing is that the government is constantly moving the goalposts, and it's hurting everyday Americans who are working hard just to make a living. If anything, these decisions are only putting more strain on the American economy. We should be using tariffs strategically, but in reality, it's a blunt tool that doesn't have the finesse needed to protect our industries. Then there's this whole idea of globalization. It's been sold as this perfect solution to all of our problems, right? But it hasn't worked. Not for Americans, anyway. And here we are, left with a situation where, instead of building up our own manufacturing base, we're allowing foreign countries to dictate our markets. The American worker has been sold out for cheap labor abroad, and that's why you see so many plants shutting down in this country. Now we're supposed to just accept that? You've got to be kidding me. The whole idea of these global partnerships has only enriched the global elite while crushing the working class here in America. The tariffs might hurt in the short term, but in the long run, They might just be what we need to start bringing jobs back home, where they belong. Next up, we've got a really interesting point about the way foreign countries, particularly China, are able to flood the U.S. market with cheap goods. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. China. Their strategy is clear. They're subsidizing their industries, and that's part of the reason their products are so cheap. But what's also happening is that they're undermining our manufacturing sector and they're undercutting American companies that can't compete with those subsidies. And the government is turning a blind eye to it. That's a problem. A big one. And these tariffs, while controversial, are at least an attempt to level the playing field. Do we like paying more at the store? No, but sometimes that's the price you pay to protect American jobs. We can't just keep rolling over for these foreign interests. Now, let's talk about trade wars. The media has a field day with this, trying to paint it as the end of the world. But the reality is, trade wars have happened before, and they've been a necessary part of protecting our economy. The thing is, we have to make sure that the people making these decisions know what they're doing. And if there's one thing we know for sure, it's that Trump isn't just making decisions by himself. He's got a whole team behind him, and we can't ignore that. People are acting like these tariffs are just some wild, irrational move, but I'm telling you, there's a plan here, even if we don't fully understand it yet. There are people with vested interests who want to reshape America's economy, and you can bet they're playing the long game. Speaking of long-term goals, let's look at the bigger picture here. The globalist agenda has been all about getting Americans to buy into this vision of the world, where the borders don't matter, and the interests of the American people come second to corporate greed. But the truth is, it's always been about shifting wealth and power into the hands of a few. The elites, they're the ones winning while we're stuck with the fallout of their decisions. It's about time we realize that, and it's about time we stop pretending like globalism is the answer to everything. Now, let's take a moment to look at what's really happening in Europe. Why is it that the European market doesn't want our cars? We've heard this whole narrative about American behemoth trucks, like the Ram 1500, and how they're too big for European roads. Sure, there's some truth to that, but what this really reveals is that Europe isn't playing by the same rules. The EU has made it incredibly difficult for American manufacturers to compete. They've set up these strict environmental standards, they've made it harder for foreign companies to operate there, and they've created a culture of protectionism. Yet, somehow, we're the bad guys when we try to push back and protect our industries. It's frustrating, honestly. The US should be leading the charge in creating smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles, sure, but that doesn't mean we have to follow Europe's path to destruction. We shouldn't be bending over backward to please the EU and their ridiculous regulations. If they want to sell their goods here, they should meet American standards. It's that simple. But no, we've been bullied into accepting their norms, and that needs to stop. The US has a right to defend its interests, especially when it comes to the auto industry, which is such a massive part of our economy. The next topic that's been popping up recently is the whole trade war with Canada. I've got to admit, I didn't see that one coming. But when you break it down, it makes sense. Canada, despite being our closest ally, has been making moves that don't benefit the American people. And now, with these tariffs in place, Canada is pushing back, and honestly, it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. The idea that tariffs are somehow going to hurt the American people more than the Canadians is a joke. As if we're the ones suffering when they're the ones benefiting from the way our trade agreements have been set up. This brings me back to the core issue here. Why are we constantly letting other countries take advantage of us? Whether it's China, Canada, or the EU, they all have their hands in our pockets, and it's time we stand up and fight back. The whole idea that we should be nice and work with them as equals is naive. It's a world of competition, not cooperation. And if we don't start acting like the dominant global force we are, we're going to lose that position. And trust me, folks, we're already losing ground, and we're only going to keep losing if we don't make some bold moves. Now, let's talk about the bigger issue of American sovereignty. It's been an ongoing trend where the globalists want to tear down our borders, tear down our identity, and tear down our economy in the name of progress. But we're not going to stand for it. We need to put America first, plain and simple. The American worker deserves better than to be sold out for cheap goods and foreign interests. We need to bring back manufacturing, we need to strengthen our borders, and we need to stop apologizing for being Americans. As we continue to push forward, let's also think about the role of the dollar in all this. It's funny how people love to criticize the US for having the world's reserve currency, but it's one of the few advantages we have left. It's the reason we can run massive deficits and still be considered a global powerhouse. But you know what? Other countries don't like it. They resent the fact that the US dollar is still the backbone of the global economy. So, what do? They try to undermine us at every turn. But as long as the dollar remains strong, we've got an edge that we can use to push back against foreign manipulation. The bottom line here is this: Trump's policies, as controversial as they are, might just be what we need. Sure, there are going to be some short-term consequences, but in the long run, they might be what puts America back on top. We can't afford to keep making the same mistakes, and we can't afford to keep letting the global elites call the shots. If we want to survive as a nation, we need to rethink everything we've been doing. And folks, it's time to start thinking about what's best for America, not what's best for everyone else. All right, that's all I've got for today's breakdown. I know this is a lot to take in, but I hope it gives you some food for thought. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with the tariff strategy? Or do you think there's a better way forward for America? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content from ClemSaur. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Alright, folks, let's get right back into it.
No, it must be the Guatemalan abuelas, you know?
Now I want to speak directly to one specific American, Donald. In the over 8 years you and I have worked together, we've done big things. We signed a historic deal that has created record jobs and growth in both of our countries. We've done big things together on the world stage, as Canada and the US have done together for decades, for generations. And now we should be working together to ensure even greater prosperity for North Americans in a very uncertain and challenging world. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald.
Because he's woke. And he is Fidel Castro's next of kin. That's why. Because Justin Trudeau is a communist.
They point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Yeah, look, the thing is, I will say this much, okay? Part of the reason why I'm not anti-tariff across the board is because I do think that it has the capacity to beef up domestic manufacturing, okay? If done correctly. If it's managed through unions like the UAW, for example, and they play a big role in how manufacturing can be increased, for example. I just don't trust the Donald Trump administration to actually actively give a seat at the table to the UAW, though. I think it could be done correctly. It just can't be blanket tariffs across the board for each individual nation. What he's doing here is basically breaking the toys that America benefited from for years and years and years. That's all he's doing. Trade negotiations that he actually renegotiated. The USMCA is the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement is literally NAFTA 2. Donald Trump implemented that. So when he turns around and he's like, yeah, I don't want it no more. What I find very strange about these decisions is that these are negotiations and agreements that benefited America and the American consumers, often at the cost of American manufacturing. Clawing that back and reshaping American priorities and reshaping American manufacturing in this way is not necessarily a bad thing in the long term if done correctly. But of course, as is the case with Donald Trump, he's not doing it correctly. I don't think that he's doing it for a good reason. I don't think he's doing it to improve American manufacturing. But to be fair, I also don't know what he is trying to do anyway, because so much of the Trump administration is just genuine insanity. Yeah, we'd have to do China level central planning to actually reindustrialize. Just doing blanket tariffs makes no sense. I know. How do you think he's going to get out of it? I don't even know what the hell he's doing. I've just never seen a right-wing administration behave like this. Yanis Varoufakis, former Greek finance minister, friend of the show, one of my favorite bald men, is on Rana Khalek's Dispatches on BT, Breakthrough News, talking about what possibly could be the reason for why Trump is doing all of the things that he's doing in terms of tariffs. Let's take a look.
And it is a rational plan. It is a well thought out plan. For me, it is a terrible plan in the sense that it works against the interests of the majority of Americans and against the interests of the majority of humanity. But we need to understand it before we fight it. And the liberal establishment are like headless chickens running around in the hope that somehow Trump is going to fail as a result of not having a plan. He's not going to have to fail because he doesn't have a plan. If he fails, he will fail because there will be people and movements that oppose him who understand his plan. So I just wanted to make this clear.
No, it's important. It's an important caveat. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the plan? To begin with, to understand his plan, we have to understand his main gripe, his main discontent regarding the state of the United States. The vast majority of people around the world, and that includes me, we believe that, and I think we're not wrong to believe, that the United States has an exorbitant privilege, and that is the US dollar.
The US dollar and the US markets, okay? America is an incredibly wealthy nation. And that's why even the poorest Americans, in comparison to like middle class people in Europe, for example, are still, when compared on the global marketplace, have a lot more purchasing power, right? Like that's why sometimes people will say stuff like, "Oh, well, you know, Alabama's like a wealthier than England," right? Like people say stuff like that all the time. Now, that's true. There's truth to that. Credit card debt is not purchasing power. Yes, it is. You're wrong. It quite literally is if you are someone who's selling goods in the American marketplace. It doesn't matter if it's being purchased with credit card debt. What matters is the money that you're getting. That's it. That's literally, like, I understand where you're coming from because that is precisely the reason why, if you simply look at GDP and if you simply look at purchasing power, you kind of fail to recognize that, like, Americans on average have a way worse quality of life than Europeans on average do, because European states at least like create a comfortable barrier of security and offer some social safety nets that Americans do not have and that they have to purchase in the private marketplace. This also then feeds back into the GDP, ironically enough. But in terms of selling goods into the American market, in terms of selling goods to the Americans, it doesn't matter if they're buying it with credit card debt or not. If you're a manufacturer of goods and you want to enter the American marketplace, you don't care if they're buying it with credit card debt. You don't care if they're buying it with predatory loans. Okay, you just care about them buying your goods.
Because when you hoard these dollars, right, then the value of the dollar vis-a-vis your own currency goes up, and the competitiveness of your export sector is enhanced. And therefore, Trump says, you see, the foreigners are taking advantage of us. We are gifting them the reserve currency, which keeps their currencies down and keeps their currencies backstopped. Instead of holding gold or whatever, diamonds, they're holding our dollars. And in so doing, they are disadvantaging our exporters, and they're advantaging their exporters who are importing into the United States. And
this is why he's mad at Japan. I mean, this is why America historically tanked. This is initially why America tanked the Japanese economy as well, which is like how in the 90s Japan turned into a multiple decade of I mean, still to this day has experienced stagnation, because if it's super cheap to make goods in Japan and then sell it to the American marketplace, also super cheap, then obviously it's just something that it's something that America is not going to be fond of. If the U.S. dollar is strong, exporting goods out of USA is hard because importing country needs to buy strong, i.e. expensive USD. Does China do this as well? Stockpile U.S. dollars? Of course. Every country does. And yes, China does as well.
Here comes the story about the tariffs. Now, conventionally, liberal establishment economists think that Trump is an idiot because he can't see that tariffs can't work to eliminate the US trade deficit. Their view is, and this is not wrong, where they are wrong is they think that Trump doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand it. what the story is that, yes, you slap tariffs on Chinese aluminum or Chinese plastics or Chinese clothes, right? But that will increase the price that American consumers have to pay, and that will jeopardize America's economy because it will push inflation up. But that at some point is not going to eliminate the trade deficit because as this happens, the dollar will go up. And as the dollar goes up, in the end, American consumers will not be paying more because even though they will have to pay the tariff, the dollar value will have gone up. So what they pay in Walmart is not going to be greater. Now, Trump knows that entirely. I've read policy papers that are circulating amongst his team, and they know this precisely and they love it. You know why? Because that's...
No way Trump understands all that. No, it's not Trump that understands it. It's, guys, just like Joe Biden didn't run the American government unilaterally, Donald Trump is not running the American government unilaterally. He has a bunch of people around him that are telling him to make these decisions because they are setting what they perceive is going to be the future of the American economy. That's it.
Now, one of the biggest frustrations that I've been hearing from people is this whole idea of free trade. It sounds nice, doesn't it? Who doesn't want to have access to cheaper goods from around the world? But the reality of free trade is not as rosy as they want you to believe. These deals have been stacked against us for years. Countries like China, for example, have been manipulating their currency and undercutting our manufacturers with government subsidies. Meanwhile, we've been led to believe that free trade means everyone is playing by the same rules. Well, that's simply not the case. The truth is, our trade policies have been a disaster for the American worker, and it's high time we acknowledge that. Let's take a look at some of the industries that have been hit hardest by these policies. Take the steel industry, for instance. This is one of the bedrock industries of America, the foundation of our economy. And what happened? We've seen steel mills close down across the country. And why? Because foreign countries, particularly China, were flooding the market with cheap steel. It didn't matter that American steel producers couldn't compete because the competition wasn't fair. They were being subsidized by their governments. And that's not free trade, that's economic warfare. So when President Trump started imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum, he was doing what needed to be done, protecting American jobs and American industries. Now, there's this constant refrain from the left, the globalists, that tariffs are bad for consumers. They claim that we're all going to suffer higher prices. And sure, that might happen in the short term. But let me tell you something. What's the alternative? Are we just supposed to let foreign countries walk all over us, steal our jobs, and flood our markets with substandard goods?
You think Donald Trump makes these decisions on his own? Of course not. Like, that's why Project 2025, I don't know what that is, when he was saying stuff like that, it was always ridiculous. Of course, he gets all of his notes from the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute. Yes. And it's not just Elon Musk. There's an eclectic group of people that have similar goals and similar interests, which is like advancing the interests of capital and undermining the administrative state. And some of them might be at odds with one another in terms of like how America should do trade in the future. And that's a pretty significant disagreement. But ultimately, right now, as it stands, all of these guys are just holding on. They recognize that America is dying. It's a dying empire, and they want to pick apart the scraps. They're not necessarily known for long-term thinking and stability. Capital owners don't really think in decades. They think in quarters. They think in quarterly earnings reports, which is precisely the reason why they're like, all right, well, if America's dying, we might as well, pick the corpse apart for scraps while that is happening. Republicans making the money they didn't make in 4 years that they weren't inside the White House through insider trading? Not necessarily that either.
How they will get foreigners to pay for the tariffs? Because here it is something that they state explicitly in their policy papers. We slap tariffs on them. Their central banks will immediately reduce their interest rates to absorb the recessionary shock to their own economies from our tariffs. As they reduce interest rates, their currency is going to go down, the dollar will go up. In the end, the import prices, the prices that Americans pay will not have changed much, but something will have changed. The trade deficit will not be eliminated, but one thing will have changed. The foreigners will be paying us money that will be paying for the tariffs. And that for the US administration, for the Trump administration is great. Not only will they be collecting the tariff money, but remember, Congress, and particularly the House of Reps, has the purse strings for tax receipts, but not for tariff receipts. To increase the amount of money that the US government gets from the American taxpayer, Trump has to convince Congress. And there he has a very thin majority, and there is just bedlam. He really doesn't want to have to negotiate with Congress.
I thought the prices were supposed to go up. Is that not true? No, I think it will. I mean, that is in the short term, I think that prices will go up. Having said that, however, this is Yanis Varoufakis trying to say that there is a reason for why Donald Trump's administration, like he's trying to figure out what could possibly be the logical reason. And it's one of the only explanations that I've heard thus far that at least like have some semblance of logic associated with it, that there is a reason for why he's doing this. And that is that he considers the power that the American dollar has a major issue with American manufacturing. And there's obviously truth to that as well. And that if he, by way of implementing these tariffs, he wants to force other countries to make their goods more expensive so that the American manufacturing comes back and other countries actually buy from the United States of America. But in the short term, this will absolutely harm the American economy as it stands. Yeah, Giannis is right. When you slap tariffs on countries will reduce their interest rates to protect their industry, so their currencies will go down against the dollar. Hence, the tariffs costs will be absorbed by those countries instead of the U.S. and prices won't go up. Maybe. I do not understand is that for that to work, factories and offices have to build first in the U.S. for this, and not only tax incentives have to be created, but bank loan and bank advantages have to be implemented. I think you're not fully understanding him. The price of the dollar goes up on the global market in the end, making foreign goods cheaper in the end while still getting tariff money. I do not foresee the price of goods immediately coming down or even staying relatively stable and then maybe in the long term creating a big boon in manufacturing, especially because in the short term, this will literally lead to layoffs, like mass layoffs in general. The chatter is wrong. When the US dollar increases in value, that means our exports are going to go up in price and the trade deficit will not close. The US also relies on non-substitutable goods abroad. Yeah, if you have, like, when it comes to raw materials, like, there is no substitute. What are you supposed to do? You know what I mean? If we just don't have it here, what are you supposed to do? He's not doing any carve-outs whatsoever. Maybe he will down the line, and I don't understand it. Or maybe he's signaling that he might do that, but he hasn't said anything about it. It just, like, doesn't make sense. Commerce Secretary Lutnick, Trump may roll back Canada and Mexico I'm done. What are we doing here? Why am I doing this? What the hell is going on? What a goddamn clown show. Okay, I'm done. I'm officially placing Trump in the unique position that I've only placed one other global leader on. The Vladimir Putin insanity position, okay?
That's a recipe for disaster. It's not just about the price of goods, folks. It's about preserving the American way of life. We can't just keep sacrificing our industries and our workforce for the sake of cheap products. This is about the future of America, and if we don't take action now, we're going to be left in the dust. But it's not just about steel. Let's talk about something that's even more fundamental: our food. We've been told that the way forward is to open up the floodgates and let other countries supply us with all of our agricultural needs. That's the globalist dream, isn't it? But what happens when we start outsourcing our food production? We're relying on other countries for our most basic needs. And if those countries decide to stop exporting to us, what do? We end up at their mercy. This is why we need to prioritize domestic production. It's time we start focusing on food independence again. The last thing we want is to be dependent on foreign nations for our food supply. And let's not forget about the working-class Americans who are getting the short end of the stick. It's easy for these elites and politicians to sit in their ivory towers and talk about the benefits of free trade, but they don't understand what it's like for people on the ground. It's those people, the factory workers, the truck drivers, the farmers, who are the backbone of this country. And these policies have been eroding their livelihoods. We can't keep ignoring the struggles of everyday Americans while we're busy cutting deals with countries that don't have our best interests at heart. It's time to put the American people first. Now, let's talk about the media's portrayal of these policies. Every time Trump talks about tariffs or taking action against China, the media goes into overdrive, warning of the impending economic apocalypse. You'd think he was starting World War III or something. The panic they stir up is unbelievable. But why is that? Well, it's because the globalist elites and their cronies in the media are scared. They know that the status quo is under threat, and they'll do anything they can to preserve it. The global trading system benefits them, and they don't want to see it upended. But here's the thing, Trump isn't doing this to hurt Americans. He's doing it to protect us. The media can spin this however they want, but the reality is that the American people stand to benefit in the long run. Alright, folks, that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into these important issues. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you think tariffs are the right move, or if you think there's another way forward for America. As always, make sure to like and subscribe for more content from ClemSaur. I'll see you next time. Alright folks, we're back, and let's dive straight into this. As we continue to see the economic situation unfold, we need to talk about something that's been a major point of contention lately: the massive spending bills that have been pushed through Congress. It's no secret that the government has been running on an ever-expanding budget, but here's the kicker. It's not coming from American taxpayers. No, instead, the federal government has been borrowing money left and right, piling on debt like it's no big deal. And who is that debt owed to? Foreign countries, primarily China. So while we're over here dealing with rising inflation and economic instability, China is sitting pretty, holding a chunk of our debt. This is not only dangerous, but it's also a betrayal of the American people. Now, let's talk about the debt for a second. We've heard the left say that debt doesn't matter, that it's just numbers on a screen, but that's a dangerous narrative. The reality is that every dollar the government borrows is a dollar we have to pay back, with interest. And who gets to collect that interest? Foreign governments like China. This is essentially giving away our sovereignty bit by bit. The more debt we accumulate, the more control other nations have over us. If we're ever in a crisis, the last thing we want is to be beholden to foreign interests because we've mortgaged our future to them. This kind of economic irresponsibility needs to end now. But let's talk about the bigger picture. These endless spending bills aren't just about borrowing money. They're about redistributing wealth in ways that hurt the American middle class. When the government keeps spending money at an unsustainable rate, it leads to inflation. That's the hidden tax. And who gets hurt the most by inflation? Working-class Americans. The prices of goods and services go up, while wages stay stagnant. This isn't just a theoretical problem. It's something people are feeling every single day. Whether it's at the gas pump, the grocery store, or trying to buy a house, the cost of living is skyrocketing, and it's all thanks to out-of-control government spending. And let's be clear, this isn't just a problem for today. The damage being done by this kind of reckless spending is going to have lasting effects. It's going to take decades for future generations to pay off this debt, and the longer we keep kicking the can down the road, the worse it's going to get. If we don't take drastic action now to rein in government spending, we're looking at a future where the American dream is out of reach for most people. Our children and grandchildren will be left with the bill, and that's not a future any of us should want. The solution: we need fiscal responsibility. We need to balance the budget, cut wasteful spending, and stop borrowing money we don't have. The government needs to stop trying to buy votes with taxpayer money and start prioritizing what's best for the American people. We need to get serious about addressing our national debt and return to a system where government spending is aligned with what we can afford. This isn't just a conservative issue. This is a matter of national survival. Now, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about immigration. This is another area where the left has been completely out of touch with reality. We've seen a surge of illegal immigrants flooding across the southern border, and yet, the establishment elites seem to think it's no big deal. They talk about compassion and human rights, but what they fail to realize is that this isn't just about helping people. This is about the security and well-being of our own citizens. Every time we let someone into this country illegally, we are bypassing the legal system that's supposed to protect American interests. And what's the left's response to this crisis? Well, they want open borders, full amnesty, and they want to reward people who have broken the law. They claim that these immigrants are just looking for a better life, and while that may be true for some, the fact is, our country can't afford to take in everyone. We have our own problems to deal with, and we can't just keep importing them from other countries. The truth is that illegal immigration is putting a strain on our resources, schools, healthcare, housing, and it's the American taxpayer who is footing the bill. But it's not just about economics. There's a national security component here that's being completely ignored. We've seen time and time again that people from all over the world are using our broken immigration system to gain entry into the country. Some of them may have criminal backgrounds, or worse, connections to terrorist organizations. We can't afford to turn a blind eye to this threat. A secure border is a fundamental aspect of national security, and right now, our border is wide open. The left wants to ignore this problem and keep pushing their agenda, but the American people are fed up. We want secure borders, and we want our immigration system to be fair and lawful. Here's something else to consider. The left loves to talk about the benefits of mass immigration, but have they ever considered the impact on American workers? We've already got an overabundance of low-wage labor in this country, and what happens when we flood the market with more workers willing to work for less? Wages go down, job opportunities shrink, and it becomes harder for the average American to compete. This isn't about compassion, it's about economics. We need to prioritize American workers and put our people first. That means securing our border, enforcing our immigration laws, and ensuring that those who come to this country do so legally. It's also worth mentioning the social and cultural implications of mass immigration. When you open the floodgates and allow people to enter the country without any checks or balances, it's not just about the economy, it's about the fabric of our nation. We are a nation founded on the rule of law, and when we let that rule of law slip away, we undermine the very principles that have made this country great. It's time to stop pretending that mass immigration is without consequences. It's time to face the reality of what it's doing to our communities, our culture, and our national identity. So what's the solution? First and foremost, we need to build the wall. The physical barrier on our southern border is not just a symbol. It's a necessity. It's the first step in restoring law and order and securing our nation. We also need to enforce existing immigration laws and end the practice of sanctuary cities. If a city or state refuses to follow federal law, they should be cut off from federal funding. We need to take control of our immigration system and stop allowing these open border policies to destroy our country. Finally, let's talk about the media's role in all of this. The mainstream media has been completely complicit in pushing the open borders agenda. They paint anyone who wants to secure the border as a racist or bigot. But the truth is, wanting to protect your country is not racist. It's patriotic. And it's time we stop letting the media push their narrative. The American people know what's best for this country, and it's time to take our nation back from the elites who are trying to destroy it. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content from ClemSaur. Stay tuned for more videos coming soon.